Today, the 1:30 panel is Remembering the Life, Activism, and Service of Franklin McCain. And on the panel, we have Mr. Lewis Brandon, Dr. Wilmote Gibbs, and Mr. Nathan Kemp. And also the moderator is Ms. Bonnie Newman, who is an endowed professor of journalism.
Good afternoon, everyone.
Good afternoon.
How are you all doing? Good to see you in here. I know it's a struggle choosing to be here or outside in the warm weather, finally, but we're so glad to see you. Again, I am Bonnie Newman Davis. I am the Greensboro News Record Janice Howroyd Bryant Endowed Professor of Journalism here at North Carolina A&T. I am also a 1979 graduate of A&T, having received my degree in English. When I graduated from A&T nearly 2 decades ago, after the man we came to recognize today, Dr. Franklin McCain, sat down at a Woolworth's lunch counter with 3 of his A&T classmates back in 1960. I cannot say how honored, humbled, and thankful I am to be here with you today. In fact, when I heard about the program, I contacted the history department to learn how I could be a participant. My desire to be here is based on my undying gratitude for what Dr. McCain, David Richmond, Ezell Blair, Joseph McNeil did, not only for this university, but for the world. Their fearless acts of courage will never be forgotten, and I am confident that today's event will further the Greensboro Four's legacy. We have a wonderful panel here with us today who will discuss Dr. McCain's life and legacy. They are Lewis Brandon, a local activist, if you could raise your hand. Dr. Wilmoth Gibbs, who is the grandson of Dr. Warmoth T. Gibbs, who is one of the former presidents here at A&T. And I grew up with your cousin, I believe, Annette Gibbs? Your sister, okay, Annette Gibbs. And Mr. Nathan Kemp, who is Mr. Jamestown, and he is a senior history major here at A&T. Okay. Before we get started, I'd like to read an excerpt from the New York Times, which ran an obituary on Mr. McCain upon his death in January. I believe it was January 9th, 2014. And after that, we'll go right into questions and hear from our various panelists. So the headline is, Franklin McCain, who fought for rights at all-white lunch counter, dies at 73. And this ran January 10th, 2014. Franklin McCain, who helped fuel the civil rights movement in 1960 when he and 3 friends from their all-black college requested and were refused coffee and donuts at a whites-only lunch counter in Greensboro, North Carolina, died in Greensboro. He was 73. The cause was respiratory complications, his son, Franklin Jr., said. Mr. McCain was one of the so-called Greensboro Four, who sat down at lunch counter stools at an F.W. Woolworth store on February 1st, 1960, fully expecting that they would not be served. When they were not, they came back the next day, and the next, and the next. As word of the protest spread, others in ever-growing numbers joined them. By the end of the 5th day, more than 1,000 had arrived, and on July 25th, the store relented and made the lunch counter available to all. That was 6 months later after they started. It was not the first such sit-in. After the Supreme Court's order to desegregate public schools in 1954, activists tried to integrate lunch counters in Oklahoma City, Baltimore, and other cities in the segregated South. There had been similar efforts in the Deep South, particularly in Orangeburg, South Carolina, and even Durham, North Carolina, back in 1956 and 1957. But the Greensboro episode, by most estimations, had the widest impact, inviting national publicity and inspiring a heightened level of activism among college students and other students. Later that year, the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, also known as SNCC, and one of the most effective civil rights groups, was born in Southern Black colleges. So having said that, and sitting here looking back all these years later on what students did here, right here at North Carolina A&T State University, they once walked these grounds and hallways. I wanted to start out by posing a question to Mr. Kemp in terms of what he knows about Mr. McCain and what is his response to the student activism of that day, and does he see that still occurring in current times? Mr. Kemp?
Well, thank you for that question. As far as student activism in today's time, I do see that happening quite often, especially with the voter suppression acts that are trying to suppress student votes, especially the African American student vote. A few years ago, when it all began, around my freshman year in 2010, many of us students went down to Raleigh, North Carolina to go against state legislature and to oppose this bill. The activism that occurred back then, I think that they had a lot to fight for. They had a lot to fight for, and I had a lot to gain. And everything they fought for, we gained.
Do you think that students today fully realize the extent of what they went through in terms of, the struggle for civil rights? Would you say that most of your classmates are aware of that, and even some of your contemporaries?
I would say that students are aware of it, but I feel as though we have somewhere been brainwashed to not believe it. In today's society, we believe that because we can sit at the same lunch counter as a white student, that everything is okay and that there's nothing going on behind the scenes. And so like I said, I feel like we've been brainwashed, but I feel like there are students in my generation that realize that that is not the case and that there is still work to be done.
All right, thank you. Let's then move back, rewind into the past, and Mr. Brandon, if you could take us back to that date and give us some of your reflections of that time and what Mr. McCain and his classmates were going through and enduring.
Yeah, thanks. Glad to see all of you. I kind of want to put this in perspective.
I constantly hear the term Greensboro Four. Well, it wasn't the Greensboro Four. It wasn't 4 Greensboro College students going downtown to sit in. It was 4 A&T students, and that's how the newspaper described it, and that's what it was. While A&T was in Greensboro, we was not of Greensboro. And that is the reason that the sit-ins occurred, because we were not a part of Greensboro. We were here in Greensboro. We were an isolated island over here on the east side of Greensboro. And all of our needs as students were met by the college. We very seldom had to go downtown for anything. And when we went downtown, we were treated as if we were not citizens of this community. So I personally object to the term Greensboro Four, because that's not what it was. We were segregated. I mean, you couldn't go to the library, you sat on the back of the bus, you couldn't go eat, you couldn't stay in a hotel, you couldn't go to the movie theaters. There were 4 movie theaters in Greensboro. The bookstore that's over on Tate Street now, which was the cinema, would not accept black people. The Center Theater now, where you all go to the Inn Club, That was a movie theater. We couldn't go in there. There was National Theater and Carolina Theater. We could go upstairs in the balcony and sit. Okay? So, and the schools were segregated. Greensboro is the last major city in North Carolina to desegregate its schools, and they did that in 1972 under court order. Okay, so this is the kind of community that we were living in. So when the four went downtown, and again, we're talking about 4 people. A lot of people beat up on students about not participating. But remember, it was just 4 people. Movements are not created by masses. Movements are not created by the masses. There's a small vanguard of people who initiate movements. And then the masses may later on participate in that, but they don't start movements. So I don't beat up on students. When they come to the realization that they need to act, then they act. And we're seeing that on a number of occasions, as when the students went down to protest the voter ID bill at the state. So, when they went down, it was just 4. However, on the second day and days after that, other students like myself joined and participated with them in the demonstrations. But it was just 4 people. And here you're talking about 4 people, even though they were 18, 19-year-old who were very committed to certain principles. And because they believed in justice and equality and assuming their rightful place in this community, they saw fit to initiate a movement.
Just wanted to quickly follow up on that before we get to Mr. Gibbs. And, you know, I appreciate you pointing that out and injecting the Greensboro community, surrounding community, because I myself neglected to tell you that I grew up here in Greensboro. I moved here when, you know, I was like 3 years old and grew up in Ray Warren homes until my family moved to Whitman Park some years later. And so I did, you know, attend segregated schools, elementary school. And, you know, my memory of that time is that there were always whispers at the dinner table about, you know, curfews and things like that, words that I wasn't very familiar with, but never anything overtly said about what was happening in the community. That was, you know, my working class household. Now, certainly in other households in the area, I'm sure young people my age were taught and told what was being going on, but, you know, I wasn't told very much. It wasn't until later. But I do remember my teachers being very angry. Many of them had graduated from A&T, and, you know, just being very angry. And they would tell us a little, but not a lot, because of course, if they told us, you know, some of these things, that would have upset the parents who feared for not only their livelihoods, but their children. So again, thank you for bringing that up. If you could also elaborate perhaps on the involvement of Dudley High, because I've heard, you know, reference to that as well.
The history books, well, unfortunately, those of us who were part of the 60 movement never wrote any books. You know, we got our degrees and went on and went to work. And so the history books, things like Eyes on the Prize, have not been very kind to the Greensboro movement. I have a PowerPoint presentation that I'm putting together and I use at various times. And the focus is really on the A&T 4, and it just mentions their names and maybe show a picture of them. They don't, but in Greensboro, there was a movement. And it started the day after the 4 students sat down. Bennett joined the movement on the 3rd day. And with that, a committee was put together. It was called the Student Executive Committee for Justice, and was co-chaired by 2 people, Edward Pitt, who was a student here on E&T's campus, and Gloria Brown, who was the president of the student body at Bennett. from that point on, all of the decisions about what happened with what would take place in February and on around the lunch counters was made in that committee. And the decisions to get arrested, the decisions when to picket, where to picket, all of that occurred in this committee. So the committee, the movement went beyond just the 4 A&T students. Okay, they were key to it. They were the people that we focused on because they were the symbols of that movement. But that was a Greensboro movement. A lot of people.
What was it called again?
The Student Executive Committee for Justice, and we used to meet right across from Graham Hall. There were 3 houses there. One would happen to be the office of the register, and we used also Graham Hall as a meeting place, but also Graham Hall out front. We would set up tables, and people would sign up to go downtown to picket and to demonstrate. So again, on the 3rd day, the students from Bennett joined. Now, a lot is made, people like to include UNCG. At that time, it was called Women's College. They came, 3 students came on the 3rd day, but, Greensboro College had come, and Guilford College students had come. But the chancellor at UNCG, Women's College, called a meeting of the student body and threatened to suspend any student who came down to participate. So they only came one day. So it was A&T and A&T and Bennett students initially. When we got ready to go home for the summer in May, a group of us went to Dudley High School and solicited the support of the Dudley High School students. And there was one student, Bill Thomas, who was a leader in the youth chapter of the NAACP, and he lived down on East Market Street. He became the leader of the students from Dudley High School who took over the demonstrations in the summer of 1960. And it was the Dudley High School students who brought to fruition the opening of Woolworth and S&H Crest. They also added, there was a department store called Myers that is akin to Macy, had a tea room, and then Walgreens had a drugstore. No, it was Myers department store had a tea room, and then Walgreens had a lunch counter. So those 4 facilities open. Everything else in Greensboro was left segregated. So then there are mass demonstrations up through 1963 that eventually opened up all of the facilities in Greensboro. But the Dudley High School students were very key because they are the ones who took the movement, and in July of 1960, those 4 facilities desegregated.
All right, very good. Thank you, Mr. Brandon. We're going to move now to hear from Mr. Gibbs, who, again, as I mentioned earlier, his grandfather, Warmoth T. Gibbs, was former president of A&T and was in, it was during his tenure that all of this activism took place. And so, Mr. Gibbs, if you could just give us an account of your memories of your grandfather, the type of person he was, and how this history impacted him in terms of his thoughts and reflections, and the statement that he's known for. We teach our students how to think, not what to think. Can you all hear the microphone? Is it loud enough?
Okay, first, I guess I should say thank you for having me. I really am honored to be here, to be asked to be here. It's obviously nothing that I personally did, just being the grandson of what everybody has known to be a great man. But I can say that from an early age, I did come to understand that why does everybody always just love my grandfather to death. And I say that because when I was very young, well, let me back up a little bit, just to kind of give a little perspective of where I could fit into the picture. I am the son of my grandfather's oldest child. His name is Warmoth as well, and he was junior, and he actually taught here as a humanities professor at A&T. And I'm the youngest of 6 children. So there were 4 girls born first, and then my brother, who's Warmoth III, and then myself. And when by the time I came along, my grandfather had retired. All of my sisters and older siblings, they were really part of the actual mix, more so than I was. When I came along, I was kind of on the back end of it. So I remember when I was in elementary school going to Bluford, when I would come home, because both my parents were teachers, and I lived on the same street as my grandfather, when I walked home, instead of going home and staying by myself, I would go to my grandfather's house, who lived a block away. And it was during that time that he and I really became close. We developed a great relationship. I don't know that I would be the person I am now is nothing compared to, I wouldn't have done anything. That's is basically what I'm saying. That time, just being with him and just growing under him, he would do things like make me read to him, which sounds kind of like simple, but it taught me some things. It taught me about reading, and it taught me to read critically, to understand the things that I'm reading. Just spending that time with him and getting the knowledge of a very wise man. And during that time, I would, even though I didn't really appreciate it, I would hear some of the stories about some of the events when he was president. And in particular, when the sit-ins started happening, and he was telling me about, how the mayor and city councilmen and the governor and state troopers and just all these big dogs, so to speak, in his office, at some moments maybe begging.
In some moments maybe begging, in some moments maybe trying to order. That he used all his power as president to get these students away from Woolworths. And he flatly refused. And everybody's heard the quote, but it wasn't, I'm pretty sure that when he said that, he wasn't trying to be profound or anything like that. That's just how he was. That's what he thought of education. He thought that education was a process where you learned and you developed and you became, you were able to think for yourself and think critically, and you didn't have to be told what to do. You can make good, reasoned, logical decisions without having to be drugged by the hand or told what to do. So that's how he was. That was his philosophy in life, in education or whatever. But it does ring true when you put it in a short, terse statement like that, because we don't want to teach students what to think. We want them to be able to flourish and be able to think on their own and come up with ideas, because obviously without being able to do that, we wouldn't have inventions. We wouldn't have discoveries in medicine, in health, in plants, food, science, or engineering, or anything. So I don't want to ramble too much, but that's how he was. I will say it was funny because growing up, again, after school when I would spend that time with him, and he would take me with him if he went to the bank or went shopping or whatever. And out and about in Greensboro, it just amazed me that everywhere we went, people knew my grandfather. And we would be in the grocery store and they would run up, "Hey, Dr. Gibbs," or some people call him Dean Gibbs because he used to be dean of the college. So he was known as Dean Gibbs by a lot of people. And I would always say to myself, I'd never forget, sometimes I would get so selfish with him and just said to myself, I wish these people would leave us alone. And that's because I saw him as my grandfather, where everybody else, you know, they saw him as a pillar of the community, as a person who helped, he helped a lot of people in this city get started, gave them their first jobs, or got them in school, got them going in some kind of way. And so from that aspect, he was important to them. He was important to them in a different way than he was important to me. So while I was being selfish with their time, they were just trying to show appreciation.
Great.
Can I just interject something here? Because I was here with Dr. Gibbs his last year here. When, as a freshman, every freshman, every student at A&T was required to take what was called freshman orientation. Okay, and it was a 1-hour course, and you didn't get credit for it, but you couldn't graduate if you didn't take that course. And the reason I'm saying this is because we had to know who all of these buildings on campus were named for. We had to know the alma mater. We had to know a whole host of things. And we had to know all of the backgrounds of all of the presidents. How many people know anything about Dr. Gibbs, where he went to school, where he came from, you know, as students here? Here's a man who had 2 degrees from Harvard University in the early 1900s. Okay? And profound, I mean, a scholar, you know, but, you know, and students, you know, we should know our history. Everybody else knows it but us, you know, and that's kind of sad. One other little thing, a friend of mine, Nelson Johnson, who is a minister here in the city, had come back and was graduating. And so a similar program like this, we were in Gibbs Hall, we decided to put on a program. And so we invited some of the older people from the community. And one of the people that we had there was Dr. Gibbs. Dr. Gibbs was like 94, 95 years old at that point. And students was actually surprised to know that this man was still living. Here he was in Gibbs Hall. You know, everybody assumed that he had just passed on. But, and he, at that point, was still very sharp and really were able to engage the students in a very meaningful way. I have a 2-hour interview that I did with him just before he passed, and he talked about many of these things, and you can go to the library and see that interview.
Wow. I would love to. I wonder if I could say one more thing. Sure. I don't want to take too much time away from. I do want to say, every time that I'm involved in some kind of event like this, whether it's in the audience or I'm participating, I'm going to be honest. As I told you, I was the youngest of 6 children, so you know, my sisters, I have sisters that were involved in the riots at Dudley. I remember, you know, there was a curfew on the city one time. I was a little kid and playing out in my front yard in the street. But there was a curfew, and the next thing I know, National Guardsmen are in Jeeps driving down my street because we all had to be inside. So I was young, kind of on the back end. I have sisters that were actually involved in it. But anyway, anytime I am involved in anything like this now, I actually learn something. I mean, sitting beside this man, every time I learn something, and not only about just the events itself, I actually learned something about my grandfather that you would think I know, but don't always know. And so it's good for me. I really like and I really enjoy coming to these kind of events because it's educational. I always learn something, and I really do appreciate being able to do so.
That's great, and you know, I'm the same way as an educator and a journalist. These things, you know, I just feel like it's so very important, and you know, from the journalistic aspect, journalists were moving forces in getting the information out. Television broadcasts, black newspapers. Later on, 10 years later, after the Greensboro situation, I don't want to say Greensboro Four anymore. but the Kerner Commission, which was issued to, study what was going on in our cities, and as a result, helped open up the doors for more journalists to work in mainstream media. But I did want to go back really quickly and, Mr. Brandon, perhaps, because you were there, do you mind if I ask how old you are?
I will be 75 in a couple months.
Okay.
Class of 1961.
Oh, wonderful. So,
Not a historian, I'm a biology major.
So I was just interested in knowing your recollection of what happened after the lunch counter was integrated. What impact did that have on the city? And was it immediate? And do you believe that it has been long-lasting, given all that we continue to hear about the International Civil Rights Museum and, the back and forth that is, just constantly goes on with it. And I also want to know how many of the students have been to the museum at some point in this discussion.
The impact, very small, just the 4 facilities. Myers Department Store, Crest, Walgreens, and Woolworth. I date my PowerPoint on the Greensboro move, what I call the Greensboro movement, the era of the sit-ins, and that was from the period of 1960 to 1963. Those 4 facilities opening up did not do anything for the rest of the community. All of the motels, hotels, restaurants were still segregated. So in 1961, in January of 61, 6 of us went to the Cinema Theater on Tate Street to see Porgy and Bess, starring the singer. No, the female. It'll come to me in a minute. But anyway, we were denied entrance, so we began in '61 demonstrating at the movie theaters. And that kind of died out when students went home. We did not have, the presidency at A&T had changed. We didn't have a Dr. Gibbs. We had a Baptist minister, Dr. Proctor, who did not see the value of demonstrations and dissent from students. So it petered out. But in the spring of 1962, CORE, the Congress of Racial Equality, who had done the Freedom Rides, was now doing what they call their Freedom Highway projects. And they were testing all of the Howard Johnson and hot shops along the eastern seaboard. And there was a demonstration in Chapel Hill. We joined that demonstration, the group of us from Greensboro. And then in July of '62, we've organized a CORE chapter in Greensboro to target all of the facilities that were still segregated in Greensboro. And so from '62 to '63, there were mass demonstrations in Greensboro. If you read the book Civilities and Civil Rights by William Chafe, and that's one of the best documents on the history of the movements, social movements in Greensboro, Civilities and Civil Rights by Chafe. Chafe says that our demonstrations in Greensboro were perhaps the largest demonstrations in the South. We know about Birmingham, we know about Montgomery because of the dogs and the fire hoses and the bombing. But in terms of sheer numbers, well, when you leave this building and you go out and you step off the curb, that used to be Old Market Street. Where you see Market Street now, that's the smokestack was in the woods. Okay, that was Old Market Street. We would have lines going down Market Street to Jefferson Square, right there where Market Street and Elm Street crosses, and people will be coming back, people will be all the way back to Hayes Taylor Y, and people will still be going downtown marching. Solemn marches. And we have, and you can come by the Beloved Community Center, and I'll show you some of the newspapers and the photographs, but mass arrests hundreds of students who were arrested in the spring of 1963. And the jails could not accommodate them, so they opened up facilities. There was an old polio hospital down on Burlington Road. They opened that up and put students from Bennett and A&T in there. There was no facilities for them. They were just in there, and they were there for days, So the movement didn't do anything, but you open up those 4 facilities. We had to push, and we pushed very hard in '63. We broke the back of the city when we stopped going from silent marches downtown. To a couple of nights we went down and we started to sing and weave in and out of downtown. And then on June 5th, we sat down in the middle of Greensboro, right in the middle of the street at Market and Elm Street. That was the only thing that brought the mayor to the table to negotiate, and we ended segregation and public accommodation in Greensboro that night.
Okay, how are we doing on time? What time is it? What time? 2:14, okay, so this goes until 2:45, okay. Did we have a Q&A period, or what's the format? Q&A, okay. Because we are gonna open it up to questions, I wanted to end with one more statement, and I'm sure we'll come back to some of the things that we've discussed. But last week, David Leonhardt, he's a New York Times editor, and he was at UNCG, and he talked about the millennials, which many of you are in that category of young people, and spoke at length about how your activism was responsible for electing President Barack Obama. And, he was very, very, what's the word? Congratulatory, for lack of a better word. I can't think of the right word right now. But he really, praised your generation for many of the things that are currently happening in our country, even though he said that the education that people of my generation obtained will never be the same for you all. You're just going to have to work harder and, endure more struggles. But he did say that, you are the most diverse group of young people. You're caring and, all the good things you hear about millennials. So I wanted you, Mr. Kemp, to, perhaps speak on that, and the others as well, and then we'll go into questions in terms of this generation and, what is it going to look like 20, 30, 40 years from now?
As far as this generation, I see this generation being much like yours, as far as activism, being heavily involved in the activism piece. Actually, the NAACP president, Pastor Mike, is actually in the audience, and at the beginning of this academic school year in 2013, he, along with the Student Government Association, we led a march to Lee Street to go against the voter suppression acts that have been going on since 2010. So in that aspect, and that reminded me of what Mr. Brandon was talking about, the silent marches that the students led downtown. It just made me think about that. So I see a connection with the generations, and I see that continuing. No matter, what goes on, I see that happening.
Brandon?
Well, that was the Monday march that you all came to. Yeah, and that was an awesome sight, standing up on the students come up Lee Street. Yeah. Millennium, I'm not too familiar with this term because in my work, in the work of the Beloved Community Center, we see ourselves as being intergenerational. We are not putting people in categories, and we want young folk working with us, and we hope that young folk want us working with them. we had an opportunity to participate in the demonstration in Occupy Wall Street. We spoke there, and when we first got there, a lot of the people were upset because they thought these old folk were coming to take over the movement and try to tell them what to do. But we were going there to see how it is that we could fit into their program. So I guess Millennium, I just want to see people in the movement.
I think we need to change seats because I can't keep coming behind you because I'm not. I tell you what, I think something that I've come to believe is that it's hard to compare generation to generation. I think one thing that we can say about some of the earlier movements, or at least during that time, I think what it showed is that you can be an activist. You don't have to just sit back and take whatever it is. Prior to that, you had little spots in history, but I think, starting with the sit-in movement, it really galvanized, college students to believe, well, black college students especially, to believe and understand that, you know what, if we do have a feeling that something isn't right, we can protest. We can do whatever we feel is necessary to try to right a wrong. I think what has happened since then is that now that we know that we can do it, now students are more willing to do it. And so whatever the cause is, and everybody can have their own, but whatever the cause is, people know that they can just stand up for what they believe. And if anything, I think that may be one difference, but the thought that somebody's being done wrong has always been present in our history. 1800s, 1900s, even now, people feel like they're being done wrong. What's different, I believe, is that people now have strength and know that they can go and do something about it. So I'll just leave it at that.
One thing I failed to mention about the 63 demonstrations. This was the introduction of Jesse Jackson into the civil rights movement. He was a student here at that time, and he joined us in April of '63, and so the rest of it is history.
The other point, or I guess question that I have regarding all of this is, and maybe someone can answer, it may not even be considered by you to be important, but I often wonder, why is it that, to me, Greensboro seems to be more well-known for the ACC as opposed to, civil rights and some of these giants that we've grown. You hear about Birmingham, you hear about, Ebenezer, you hear about all of these other places, but, in my travels and meeting with people, and even sometimes when I say, I go to A&T, I went to A&T, or I teach at A&T, well, where is that? Or AT&T, you all get it all the time, I'm sure. So, does it matter? I think it probably doesn't, but again, I do ask the question. Would any of you like to respond to that?
I don't know if it really applies. I think there are a lot of aspects to it. One is, who's telling the story? And obviously, if you have the ACC headquarters located in Greensboro and the amount of money and resources they have, well, they can tell the story, and they can tell it to a lot of people, and you better believe that story is going to be about them, not us. So, and that goes for everybody. So, and I think that when you start looking at things like Birmingham and, those type of events, well, by that time, think about it, Greensboro had already done its damage. And once again, now you have the South and people in the South knowing that, hey, we can protest, we can stand up. And now they're doing it on a national level and maybe got some press, but I kind of likened it to a couple of years ago, I got an email from Chancellor Martin, well, one of his representatives, it wasn't directly from him, but They asked me to come to one of the February 1st luncheons that they were having because they were going to award my grandfather an Unsung Hero Award. And I'll be honest with you, I mean, maybe this is just conceit on my part, but up until then, I thought he was one of the heroes, not one of the unsung heroes, so it was kind of it was like, really? But then when I put it into perspective, and I do understand, those four really are. You know, they're the ones that went down there. My grandfather had nothing to do with their decision to go down there. They went down there and they put themselves out there in harm's way night after night after night. And I think what, you know, when my grandfather got the Unsung Hero Award, it was because he was a person that showed support, that didn't give in, and so his contribution was relevant and it was good. Yet he just wasn't one of the four, but it doesn't by any means diminish what he was doing or his part in it. And I think it's kind of the same thing with Greensboro. You know, we kind of got the ball rolling, or if you want to liken it to a jar of pickles, you know, somebody tries to take the top off, can't do it, loosen the top, but then when you hand it over, you know, somebody else just pops it off. So regardless of that, unsung or known or not, you know, Greensboro place in history can't be denied, and it will always be here.
I think that the media has a lot to do with the coverage of civil rights activism in Greensboro. Some years ago in 1979, there was what they called the Greensboro Massacre occurred at Morningside Homes. And it was led by the KKK. They killed some of the Communist Workers' Party, actually all of the members that were there. And
5 people.
They
killed 5 people.
Yeah, they killed the 5 people. And the coverage that the media got, the media caught it all on tape. It's all on video. You can find it on YouTube. But because those of us we're not in the power behind the media, we can't control what gets out. And so the suppression of that video was enforced by the police and the government because we don't control that. So I think that the media plays a big role in, like Mr. Gibbs had mentioned about the ACC and the power that they have and those that hold the power of the ACC. That has a lot to do with it.
Yeah. Maybe Dr. Roberto would answer that question.
You mean because I used to work for the media?
Well, that and you know Greensboro.
Right. Well,
Yeah.
I mean, it's true. The media in this city has always written stories from a point of view. Even when good reporters went out and covered the story, by the time the story got to the editorial desk, it went from the assistant city editor to the editor, and then to the managing editor. By the end of the day, when the story went into the paper, for the reporter who wrote it, it looked like a completely different story. So that's what I think Mr. Kemp is suggesting here. And the community has fought that for years. There is an African-American weekly paper in this community that has fought with limited resources to get the story straight when it needed to be straight. Sometimes it happens, sometimes it doesn't. But I think the cumulative impact of all this is that the powers that be in this city still manage to control the media, and they run the stories that they want to run. And that's why the ACC is a lot more popular and much more widely read than the things that we need to be reading about, because after all, it's the media that informs us. It's the lifeblood of the community. Free press, free and open press is absolutely essential to the democratic franchise in this city and everywhere.
Yeah, you know, one of the one of the instructors in the journalism department is also the editor of the editorial page for the Daily News.
Alan Johnson.
And he is part of promoting the status quo. And some of the stuff that he writes is really bad. You know, I doubt very seriously that when I was in school, he would been able to stay in that department, given the kinds of things that he writes and positions and that he takes in this community that are not pro community. But Greensboro is a, you know, you don't see what I used to see when I would come down Market Street, because there was dirt roads everywhere, coming on in, you know, and shanties and rundown houses. Greensboro got a lot of open space and parks, and it looks good. But it's like a cake. When you take the icing off, it's bad. And they have gone to no limits in shutting down information and shutting down the discussions about equality and social justice in this community. And they have done all kinds of things, like they sold a swimming pool so they didn't have to desegregate. They closed down the golf course so they wouldn't have to segregate, integrate. When the courts in '67 ordered them to open up Caldwell School on Martin Luther King to black kids, they moved all the white kids and teachers out of that school. The acceptance of the Civil Rights Museum is not there. There have been 2 bond issues trying to get that place, the place open, and it was voted down in Greensboro. And we're still now arguing with them about some money. And it was not until the late 90s when a study was done about how to revitalize downtown Greensboro. In that study, it said that the Civil Rights Museum could be a centerpiece for revitalizing downtown. It was at that point that the Chamber of Commerce began to accept that facility as a possibility. Many of us who were part of the sit-ins were persona non grata in Greensboro, you know, and up until the 90s. So Greensboro has this reputation of being a very progressive and open city, but when you dig and go and look under things, it's not.
He wants to say something
Now y'all
else.
hand it back to me.
He wanted to say one more thing, I guess.
Yeah, I just wanted to say, okay.
What Mr. Brandon said, I mean, below the surface are serious problems. For example, the poverty level in the city. The poverty level in the city officially is 20%. It has been at that. That's been the official rate for the last 5 or 6 years. But poverty is measured officially on the basis of a family of 4 making $23,400 a year, or whatever it is, which means if you're a family of 4 making $25,000 a year, you're not living in poverty. Now, the median household income in East Greensboro is $23,300, which is half of what the median household income is in the rest of Greensboro. In other words, in predominantly white Greensboro. So how can you ignore a statistic like that? And furthermore, how can this be a land-grant university that is here in part to fundamentally serve this community? We have all this expertise here. A&T, in addition to educating people, should also be committed to finding a way to develop this community around it. And I'm waiting for that day to occur.
Okay, we'll go on to questions. The lady in the back. Do you need the microphone? Okay.
No, I don't think I need it. I just want to add a comment about the pressure of local and state government, and also on A&T. If you go to the Civil Rights Museum, Lewis and Duke talking about this, there's nothing on that 1979 KK incident, because the museum leaders from the beginning were too sensitive. They thought they would offend someone in the city, whereas the Greensboro History Museum hasn't. And then also thinking of wonderful Dr. Gibbs, I just think the pressure that was on him, and that he could have been president much longer after the A&T 4, and how even when Martin Luther King came, I believe 58 or 59, our leaders here at A&G were too sensitive to have them, and it had to be over at Bennett. And other instances, even Paul Robeson Theater, at first people were too sensitive to name it after him. So pressures are still there because at A&T, on A&T, because we're a state university.
Yeah.
And you know, even Black Studies, when CG has it, we don't have it. They had to fight in '89 to have a requirement in African American studies. One requirement, 3 credits, and then it became global and African American. So the struggle and the influence of government, local and state, is still going on.
I agree wholeheartedly.
Thank you. I just wanted to piggyback on that to say that I left Greensboro in 1979 when I graduated, went off grad school, and worked in Richmond, Virginia for 30 years before coming back here 3 years ago to my current position. And I've written a little bit about some of these things for the News and Record in op-ed pieces. Still trying to find my way because immediately upon coming back, I just sensed that something was amiss. Didn't quite pinpoint what it was, but you know, the longer I'm here, the more I talk to people, the more I attend events like this. I'm starting to relearn my city and learn some things about it. Many of the things that I'm finding out I do not like, and that is one of the reasons why I am here today. When you talk about the East End, and like I told you earlier, I grew up mostly in Woodmere Park. At that time, back in the 70s, we had grocery stores, drug stores, you know, you could walk to the grocery store. Nothing is over there now, and they're still fighting to this day, people in that community to help revive it. And the museum and all the back and forth about it, it's nonsense. You know, I lived in Richmond, capital of the Confederacy, for 30 years, and trust me, it wasn't as bad as what I've come back to. Any other questions? Someone's got a question.
I have more of a statement.
Yeah.
It goes back to, well, first of all, my name is Chelsea Nani, and I'm a junior here at North Carolina A&T, and I'm a journalism student. And my comment would be to compare generations. I love my generation, but I think we lack passion, and I think we lack a little bit of motivation, because what it took to get here isn't, like, I don't feel like the fight is over. I feel like constantly, every day, that I'm fighting for someone else, someone who's gotten shot, or someone who's, I'm just trying to get everyone's story out there, but how do we get the story using all of these students? Because I don't know all these faces in here, but I would like to use all these people to get messages out there, messages on the things that you've done and what your grandfather has done, and how do we just display that history without leaving out all the details and everything that we need to know as far as history goes.
Dr. Arnold Smallwood.
Again, I'm Dr. Smallwood, August Smallwood, the new chair of the Department of History, and I will have to say honestly, I think that that's part of our responsibility as a history department. And when you talk about your generation, several people here, Nana left, but several of the students who have participated in planning and organizing this event, they attended a sala with me in the fall, and then we laid out this agenda for you all. And students at North Carolina Central, which is your sister institution, they're very engaged, they're very involved. They're writing history, they're interviewing local people and making documentaries about the history of blacks in Durham and in the civil rights movement. And so it's really our responsibility as historians and as a part of the history department here at North Carolina A&T to motivate you all, to guide you all, to mentor you all, to help you appreciate your history, and events like this one, to display it for you so that you become motivated and understand what people sacrificed so that you could be sitting here in this room. And so I accept responsibility, and whether my fellow faculty members do or not, I'm accepting it for them as well, because it's our responsibility to engage you all, to excite you all, and to get you involved. And I see it with young people in Memphis. When I left Memphis, I see it at North Carolina Central, I see it at Florida A&M, I see it at Howard, I see it at schools all over the country, St. Augustine's. So yes, you can do more. Yes, you have these community leaders as role models and as examples, but we also have to be role models. We have to be examples, and we have to help get you guys moving and the next generation, these junior and high school kids, get them excited, get them motivated. And that's what today and the events that we planned for yesterday and today are all about. Getting you engaged, getting you excited. Whether you're history majors or not, it is your responsibility to be involved.
Can I ask you a question? I'm glad to hear that, because in 1986 I wrote a proposal to the university. I thought we needed to create a civil rights institute, and we also had the African Heritage Center, and I thought we could bring both of those together to so people could give their papers and things to the university. And it was rejected by the university. They went over to UNCG and met with them. And so now the depository for the civil rights movement in Greensboro is at UNCG. And one of my concerns is I have materials. I have not brought them to the archives because we don't have archivists, somebody who can handle the stuff. And I would hope maybe the history people, people in the history department will begin to move on that and try to raise some money and push the university to get somebody who could do that. Right now, the materials that we have right now, the John Hope Franklin Institute at Duke is negotiating with us to get those things. I would prefer them to be at A&T, but as long as stuff is just sitting in boxes on the floor, I can't do that.
Well, and I hear that and I understand. Again, remember, I just got here, been here 6 months.
Okay.
And I have
Fair
a
enough.
few ideas. And since you raised that, we are going to try to develop and submit a preservation and access grant to the NEH, which really does that. It's supposed to basically give money to help with the preservation of materials, whether they're interviews, photographs, papers, and that kind of thing. So I am going to try to put that together, but there is a lot, that we're doing. And I appreciate what my colleagues in the history department have been doing, and these young people particularly, and they're sitting on the front row here. And go ahead and stand, guys, again, for the benefit of these individual officers that are here. And it But know that that is certainly a concern, and I'm prepared to work with you and any other community leaders to do that. It's about us trying to preserve our history as best we can, but I certainly at no point would ask someone to put materials in a place where they're not going to be preserved or taken care of. But there are things that we can do in terms of securing grants and support to actually create the facilities on the campus that we need to preserve those materials. So I'm certainly prepared to work with you, because that's what we need. Is if I can have what your materials are all about, we put that into the preservation and access grant. It's a several $100,000 multi-year grant. To basically collect and catalog what we already have and the stuff that you have. That's what it's all about. We get together and we put that proposal forward, and we try to establish that here at A&T.
Okay.
You know what? I know we're out of time, but I just wonder if I could ask you just one quick question, if I may. And this thought just occurred to me with the issues and trouble that the Civil Rights Museum downtown has been having, trying to stay open or even open, stay open, be open, everything. I'm just curious, is it possible, or would there be a way if, say, A&T were to somehow try to acquire the concept or the property and make it an extension of the history department or something like that, even though it's located downtown? We seem to have an answer back there. I don't know.
I'm sure Dr. Ndege can answer this question better than I do. If you want to, you should answer it. But we tried, right?
And not only, and then you heard what Mr. Brandon said when he tried to create our institute, merging the Mattie Reed African Heritage Center and with his new idea. And I directed the Mattie Reed African Heritage Center, brought it from a little house to the Dudley building, and there's no one over it now, really. I mean, it's under art, but again, because of selfish personal reasons by our top leadership. You know, they emphasize art over civil rights and over being a center. That's why the International Museum is a center, not just a museum. And I'm still here, you know. And I have proposed, in which our new leader, Human Rights Center, and in terms of a master's program, a PhD program in African American history. And I have set that to the top. The facilities there, space is being wasted. We could start, if he gets this grant, preserving right there. We have space to house your things. And maybe do something else with the Civil Rights Museum in a partnership. But we're struggling with what we have now, neglected, let go, what I did. So the answer is no. That we'll let UNCG take all of that. Archival materials, where it started right here in the African American community and at this HBCU. And we've got to stop always worrying about, even though we're state university, we have to make certain stands. And it's not, we could get more money. Actually, if we had an institute that you proposed, but people are too scared that, well, that's going to emphasize black studies, and they think, I don't know, if we're going to have this, it's going to be, you know, too militant. No. If it's at Harvard, why can't it be here, where it started? Thanks.
Sounds like to me an opportunity for student activism, but I'm just saying.
Well, to follow up on that, in terms of, you know, building and creating institutions, I've been part of a committee in our department to chair a new center for media, and I'm hopeful. One of the things that I've been told is, you know, we need money in order to make it happen, you know, but the first proposal was exactly that, to create a center that focused on news media diversity. Nobody wanted to, and they weren't interested in that, so move on to the next step. But long story short, I have dedicated myself to continue working on this new media institute, and it should be interdisciplinary, which means, you know, we'd love to partner with the history department, partner with some of the other disciplines here at the university. But again, you know, I can't do it alone, and I do depend on my students a lot. And oftentimes they're ready and eager and willing to be a part of it if it is explained to them, and, you know, they know that they will have a stake in it. So I appreciate everything that everybody's saying, but it does take money, and it does take collaboration. The founders of the Civil Rights Museum, they're Eagles, you know, North Carolina Central guys, but they've been selfless in even getting this thing off the ground. So, you know, but they need help, and it's up to us to help them. I do encourage all of your students to visit the Civil Rights Museum. Some students can't afford it, which is why they haven't gone. I try to take my students and find the money to do that. And, you know, there are some hopeful moments. I know that there's an organization that is documenting the history of Greensboro and talking to people with, I believe it's one of those Ancestry.com organizations. So we can help get you involved in that. The Triad Association of Black Journalists is active in helping with that. I'm a member of the National Association of Black Journalists, been active for many years, formerly served on the board. You know, maybe to end things on a happy note, I was very pleased to see the video of A&T. I think one of our journalism students put it together based on Pharrell's Happy song. And what was pleasant about it was, you know, at the end they did incorporate the statue of the 4 young men who helped launch the modern civil rights movement. And some might call it blasphemy with them dancing on the statue. Are you familiar with what I'm talking about? Did you all see it, the video? But to me, it, symbolized a lot. It meant that you all are aware, you know what's going on, and you can take something that happened, 40, 50 years ago, and make it current. You can embrace it and make it yours. And that's what I saw when I saw the students up there dancing, on the statue. And we have to, create other moments such as that speak to your generation to keep it going. Any other thoughts, questions? Yes.
I just have a question in regards, like, for your proposals, who do you have to submit those to? Do they have to go to the chancellor's office?
As a student?
No, anybody, like the proposals that they're doing for the history department, the proposal that he was talking about, he presented? Do they have to submit those? Do those have to pay it?
It actually goes to Raleigh, that's the problem. It has to be approved by the UNC system.
But it depends on the question that you're asking. If you say, for example, this program and what we are doing and have done today and yesterday, there are ideas that faculty can develop, and using departmental budgets and whatnot and the resources available on campus that we can create. But then you have state funding opportunities and you have federal funding opportunities, which you have to go through a process. So it depends on what you're saying. But ideas, I mean, we can come up with creative ideas. It's like this history scholars, came up with this creative idea and are working together to make sure that this takes place. I mean, we can do that. And I just wanted to add one other thing about what the panelists have said. You have to understand, I've lived in many states, Ohio, Illinois, left Memphis, out here again, born and raised in eastern North Carolina. First of all, local people, home people, always take for granted what their people have done and take for granted the specialness about their city. And almost every history book, and I teach American history and African American history, they talk about Greensboro, they talk about the city, and they talk about the A&T Four. It's known all over the country, all over the world. Everybody knows about Greensboro and knows about A&T. So local people have a tendency to not value it, and certainly since there was a clash between the white community and the black community, they're not going to want to appreciate it. So it's the responsibility of the community, and you all, since you're in this community, even though many of you will leave the community once you graduate and take jobs out of state or other places, it is our responsibility to preserve this history and to hold it up with the help of the local people, okay? So, but that's normal. I mean, it's normal. The people in Memphis, the white community in Memphis, they don't care about Civil Rights Museum in Memphis. They don't, I mean, the kids who go, when they see the blacks hanging who are being lynched, they're laughing and pointing at it from the local schools. I mean, they don't, they don't appreciate that. It's money from outside.
I would have to differ with you on that. There are many white people in this community who feel very strongly that there should be a Civil Rights Museum downtown.
Okay, good. But
So let's be careful as historians about what we're saying here. Let's really get an accurate pulse of
what I'm saying, Dr. Roberto, and I know that you're an activist, and I know that you always like to argue the points, so I appreciate that, and I respect that. What I am saying is, and I think the panelists understand it too, that we do have a tendency, whether it's our own individual families or it's our community, we have a tendency not to appreciate it. Just like you were just stating about your grandfather, that you knew he was a special man, but you didn't know how special he was. And we have a tendency not to appreciate the things around us and the people around us. And it's our job to make sure that they are appreciated. And once we appreciate it and once we develop it, then we can hold it up for other people to examine and to begin to appreciate as well. As I've always said, last thing I'm going to say, success has many fathers and mothers. Failure is a bastard. Nobody wants to claim it. And so nobody, until you develop something that's successful, when it's successful, and the museum here can be very successful, particularly nationally and internationally. Until the local people understand that and give it the support that they need to give it, that's the way it's going to be. But once that happens, I think they'll see that this is a jewel for Greensboro, and it'll be a draw for people from all over the world, not just around the country.
Thank you, Dr. Smallwood, and thank you panelists also, and the audience for coming out today.